Record this bad boy. So that's a great question that you brought up. So, how to say the right things when approaching a cold market? Really, it's interesting because when you see everybody as a potential opportunity to talk to, I'll use the easy layups first. So, anybody have kids? You know, Uh, Kids have sporting events, if you will. So when you think about it, you're going to watch the kids play whatever event, doesn't matter what, but let's say John is there watching his kid, I'm watching my kid. Oh, who's your kid? Oh, they're number two. Oh, I've seen them play before. They're great. How long have they played? This and that. And then, you can start striking up a conversation like, hey, I'm Phil. Nice to meet you. Have you lived here a while? Go through some of the easy questions and then see if there's a connection to kind of go for what do you do? And then kind of lead in from that standpoint. So I look at that as an opportunity over a long period of time because you don't want to just go up to everybody, at an event and just start asking everybody what they do. But I've had conversations with some kids' parents. Like we had a separate lunch meeting one time where a guy basically insures people's private planes. And I was like, if you added, insurance to the line, you guys could make a ton of money and this and that. It didn't really go anywhere, but it's just really kind of having those kind of questions. Now, there are some people who do it at the absolute inappropriate time, like, and I've heard this from people I've talked to, like almost like a place of worship. To me, I think that's kind of not really the place where I would want to go and start pitching myself, to be completely honest. Now, to kind of use a place of worship and say you'd like to offer a free course on financial literacy to the church, synagogue, mosque, whatever, that's a different story. But I've heard some people will literally just flood it and start out asking if people want to, join groups. I'll put it that way, or buy coverage or things like that. So I get a little leery about that, but I think there's a lot of people that are rather hesitant to just simply go and talk to people. So you have to kind of put it in your own mindset that when you're going out there and you're meeting someone, appropriately, not just like picking lettuce up at the grocery store. But just to talk to people is just a simple art form of asking a lot of questions. And I think that's what a lot of people miss out on is the part where you ask questions because they just want to get to the point of what they want to buy or sell, right? Um, I've actually started going through again how to win friends and influence people. And the first two chapters are just fantastic unto itself because if you think about the human mindset, we're always trying to figure out what we want and not always about what the customer wants. So, in the art of selling, you're always trying to figure out what you can get someone to buy, and really, it's trying to listen to and find the problems that people have by asking questions. That's oftentimes why, like a lot of times, I like to say I solve problems that people didn't know they have, because a lot of times people don't even think about insurance, and after you talk about what would happen if you don't make it home tonight, what's going to happen to your kids, what's going to happen to your spouse or whatever, all of a sudden the aha moment hits. It's a problem they didn't know they had. Um, Good example, I was talking with one of my agents today, and she's one of the newer agents that just came on, and she brought a friend on to talk about IULs. And so when the lady came on and I said, so what brings you on today? She's like, well, I'm actually here to support my friend. I'm interested in buying life insurance, but, I really want to support my friend. And I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit about the dynamic. She's, uh, you know, she's got a couple kids, divorced, and, just has a retirement problem. But at the beginning, it was, I need to buy an IUL for myself and my kids. But by the end of the conversation, the problem was not really her kids. It was really for her. And, we had a really good conversation, really enjoyed the conversation. But, if we didn't ask a lot of questions, we wouldn't get to that time frame or that potential opportunity. So whether it's a cold market or a warm market, having that smile on your face, introducing yourself, what brings you here, why you here, what do you do, you have kids, this and that. You're just fact finding and they don't even know it. So it's, from a situational standpoint, the easiest way in a cold market would be, if you have something to do with your kids, because that can turn into a warm market pretty quickly. But if you're just literally talking like going into a grocery store and striking up conversations, I I don't think I would buy from someone if they came to me up in a grocery store and asked me what's going on. But you never know with certain people. So I like to say, like Subash, the thing that I would do is offer, type of literacy courses, or some type of seminar, an educational seminar, that allows people to come to it, whether it's 3 people, 5 people, 10 people. It could be at your house. It could be at, like, if you're in a community, you have those community centers where you can rent out the room and things like that. That would be probably the best way that I would approach it, from that standpoint, or speaking with a library and seeing if you can, rent a room there. Usually it's free. And then just put stuff out on social media, or put stuff out, in, like, if you have a community, if they have, like, those little pull tabs, where you know, get something to go to. So stuff like that. But does that help? I know it's
Yes.
kind of skirting the question,
No, yes,
but
it did because you touched both the things that I go through in my life right now. My son plays basketball.
oh yeah.
He's a sixth grader, so I do meet few parents, and he just started going to a private school, Catholic school, last
Oh,
year. So yeah, I do. And you touched both of them. One the game and one the church. So I also practice Christianity. So I go to a community church. So thank you, Phil.
yeah.
It helped. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, and I think it's funny because, so, throwing out there, I'm Christian too, and the hard part about, the Christian faith is that you have Dave Ramseyites all over the Christian church.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Financial Peace University is just ripe, unfortunately, with that. So, you do have to compete with that. But what I would say is that, from that standpoint, Dave Ramsey is a good get out of debt guy, and that's kind of where it stops. So I think from an educational standpoint, there are people who will surround themselves in a, framework of, having to go through 8 courses or 12 courses. I think it was like 12 CDs. But, if you're talking about a one night thing, I created a deck, for, what I would say is a client producing deck to talk about the benefits of IULs, annuities, and things like that. And, I can gladly share that at some point. But, yeah, I would say that's the only thing that I've found to be a little problematic with the Christian churches, is they really highly invest in, the Dave Ramsey, approach. And, if you lived here in Nashville, you could drive by his really, 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 really big building and say to yourself, "Huh, that's interesting," because you could call him an entrepreneur or whatever, but he's definitely made a market off of the Christian faith. And, he's actually went to our church. He cut a giant check down the middle of of it. We had overtaken another church that had like 7 million in debt, crushed the debt, and then Dave Ramsey came out with a chainsaw and cut it down the middle, and then did the sermon. So it was kind of awkward, but it's each and to their own. Um, but awesome. Yeah, didn't mean to segue off of that. Any other questions? I know, Teresa, you wanted me to talk about how to understand pars, caps, and spreads as a good talking point. So I can definitely do that. But wanted to just see if anybody had anything else that they wanted to talk about before we kind of dive into something like that. I told you I'd wait for you to do this,
So,
just so you know. Yeah, go ahead.
uh, how do we fasten the blood work part? Because sometimes, like, I'm working with an client right now, the blood work was scheduled, but the nurse did not show up on time, and then we had to reschedule it.
Mhm.
So, how do we avoid these, and then how do we make this process uh, quicker and make it smooth?
Well, part of it, so that's a really good question. How to smooth out the underwriting process. So, I think, for those who don't know, I spent 15 of the 18 plus years in corporate, on the other side of the coin, watching, the machine be made. And it's always been a struggle with the underwriting, whether I was with MetLife, AIG, even now in my role, you always run into some issues with underwriting. So you'll have certain areas that are very rural. And so there might be one examiner that covers APPS and exam one, and neither of them make it. So we've had situations in the past like that. So if you have a situation where an examiner doesn't make it out, reschedule, we can go to the carrier and escalate it, whether the client's mad or not. My client's furious. This person was supposed to be there, and what happens is it lights a fire under the carrier because the carrier doesn't want to lose business. And so the carrier will then light a fire under their vendors to make sure someone gets out there as soon as possible. So, but what I would really say from that standpoint is this. Um, when you think about it, what I always like to say is there's an expectation or an expectation and a reality, and in between is what you call frustration, right? So someone has this expectation, the reality's here, and they just are livid because it's not fitting into the expectation of what they were looking for. So what we have to do is, I don't care who does non-med, who does medicals and things like that. What I would always address in your conversation with the person is setting the right expectation. So if I said to you, I was like, okay, what we do next is we take this application that we're going to fill out and we're going to go through the underwriting process. Typically, underwriting takes 4 to 6 weeks. And there's a situation where we'll need to do lab work, which is blood, urine, and they're going to come and ask you really fun questions like, have you ever done heroin? Have you ever skydived? And you can make a joke out of that because those are literally the questions. But, it warms up the conversation as to what's to come. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Client, there is a possibility that you could get non-medical and we won't have to go through this, but I'd rather set the expectation of what the normal would be, a 4 to 6 week time frame with a lab technician coming out and getting those things. So what you're doing is you're building that buffer so the expectation and reality aren't so far apart, but maybe here that where if someone does make a mistake and not show up, then what we can do is say, I'm right on it, I'll take care of it, and ultimately kind of go back and the carrier will usually fall on the sword for the situations like that. So that's the big thing. And then ultimately, when you get into it, now Mr. and Mrs. Client, typically it's 4 to 6 weeks. If you're talking to an older client, might have some ailments or issues. Mr. and Mrs. Client, just to let you know, sometimes they will request doctor's records, and those are out of our hands. Just to give you an idea, we have to go to your doctor, request labs or doctor's information, and then we're held victim to however long it takes to get that back from them. So is it okay that if we have to get records from your doctors, that I ask if you can go on your side and expedite it with your doctor to push along the process? So now what you're asking for is a teamwork approach with the customer to get the process done. Nana, were you
Thanks,
going to say
sir.
something?
No, no.
Philip, yeah, I was
Thanks,
just
sir.
going to say that I had a client last year
Hmm.
where the value or the value that we're looking for was below the medical limit. Like, they say under 1 million, we don't need medical, etc. Yet,
Yep.
underwriting came back and requested a medical. What is there something in the application process that might have triggered something like that for them to request the medical, or is it
Yeah.
random?
Well, it depends on the carrier. So, let's always remember that unless you have a truly non-med carrier like F&G is a true non-med carrier for up to $1 million for US citizens. They'll go up to I think 300K for H-1Bs, but unless they're truly a non-medical company, they'll trigger lab work if someone has like behind the scenes, if you guys don't know this, what they always check is motor vehicle reports. So, do you have speeding tickets? Speeding tickets mean that you have added risk to your normal portfolio that could cause for them to add what's called a flat extra or an increased price. So, they look at motor vehicle reports. The big one is Milliman. Milliman is like the dominant agency that looks up all your hospital visits, all your medical visits, all your RX prescriptions and everything. So what would happen is that if there's any inkling of a fear of not being able to go through that pass through, then they're going to trigger lab work. And that's typically what happens is most people, unless you have a very healthy lifestyle, will probably get triggered to go through some form of lab work.
Okay,
So
appreciate that. Thank you, Philip.
no problem. Did that answer the
Oh.
other initial question too?
So lab work
Mhm.
is if you don't have the medical records already. Did I get
Well,
that right?
lab work would be paramed, blood, urine, Part B from the carrier. Now, if for example's sake, let's say you went with, throw out carriers, don't take any bias by it. Say you did something with National Life Group, okay? You didn't like the offer they gave you, you can take that lab work back, the paramedical exam, and then maybe send it to another carrier and see what they think of it. So the client doesn't have to do a blood and urine draw twice. But for those who have done this in the past, you'll find that they'll sometimes say, "Hey, need a paramed." And you're like, "Wait, I already did that. Here it is." The paramed is really part B. So if you asked the questions on the NLG app where it says, "Have you done heroin? Have you skydived?" and all that stuff, well, a lab technician has to go back out and do a non-invasive paramedical exam or not blood and urine, but on your new app, say you go to AIG after and say, Have you done heroin? Have you skydived and things like that? So there's part Bs are usually not given up by the carriers. That's like their golden ticket for you to keep the policy with them and make it more difficult to try and shop it. So paramedical is what you would typically call lab work. APSs stands for attending physician statements. That would be if you have to get doctor's records from the doctor, or if someone went to a cardiologist, are you getting, cardiologist records? So usually when I deal with people who have some type of ailment, a great thing to ask is who's your primary care physician. Have you seen any specialists in the last 10 years? So, dermatologist, cardiologist, things like that. I don't need to know your pediatric physician when you were 10, but if there's some type of reason for me to get some other info like a cardiologist, that's very important because that means you've had your heart checked out. And what'll happen is the worst thing that it's ever happened, and I've seen it time and time again, is we as agents want to protect the client from giving too much information. But then the last sentence in an APS that we get from a doctor says, requested client sees Dr. Tia to talk about, cardiologist to do a stress test. And then there's like, please order from Dr. Tia, get this and that. So it elongates the process. So if you talk to someone and they have specialty doctors, it's always good to have that information in advance, even if you don't specify it when you do it, but just to have it as a backup so you don't bother the client. So it's a good way to kind of streamline the process. And typically that's for older clients. So I'm thinking like 60s and plus. So that would be a good spot to have that.
Yeah. So, Phil, I just want to add something here,
Yeah.
assuming some of them may be new, not having a lot of experience. So, when it's specific to these reports and parameters, a lot of people may not even know what exact when some of these. I want to explain one of the case that I've dealt a year ago with the AG itself. So, one of my close friend, everything was good, blood work is good. So, part of the blood work, nicotine is negative, but he got standard tobacco rating. So when I asked about it, they said it's part of pyramids, right? And so I even at the time I don't know what exactly it is. So top to bottom, I search. Where is this positive? Every single letter that's part of the report. When I say report, after the blood work is done, client have access to the complete report of the blood work. And one of the line item is nicotine test. It purely says negative. So I've been like, back and forth asking everybody, hey, give me the report where you say positive and how you say. And nobody says, everyone says it's part of paramedic. So I did not understand where this report is available. I had tried more than a week. Lately, I figured out when the nurse comes in, they ask random questions or a lot of questions, right? One of them is, do you smoke? This, my friend who was an idiot, 10 years ago, he used to smoke. He mentioned, I used to smoke long, long ago, but now I'm not. This is how the answer he said. And they said yes. So, which means the nurse just written something on the piece of paper that triggered for the company. Okay, now he had tobacco usage, which means standard tobacco. And that's it. To figure out this information, it took a lot of time. So what my message I want to convey here is, once the blood work is done, the client would get access of whatever the results of your blood and urine, but they may not get access to the paramedics. It's very important, you being an agent working with your client, you have to instruct them, hey, when nurse comes and asks these questions, you have to be very crisp and tell the rightful answers. If you really want to say this, say this.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, you just ask those questions before even the nurse go and ask. And if you feel anything that's, okay, this is not the answer how you're supposed to say, prep them up. Just say only this. And all these things I learned from Phil. So one of this reason I got a big case in my life. So thanks, Phil. Thanks for that. So it's
No
very
problem.
important. We have to understand what is pyramid. It's not something that you'll see somewhere. It's just that whatever the questions nurse ask, they call it as a report, which we don't have access to. We don't see it.
Yep. Yep.
Sorry, Philip, do we kind of have a guideline or copies of basic questions a nurse would ask the client? Or is it
Technically you
random?
do. Yeah, no, it's not random. So like if you let me do this, I'll show you guys. You have access to all of that through let's go to 3Mark. Okay. So if we go to tools and resources and you go to forms and iGo, launch forms and iGo, but we're not going to go into the actual application. So, for example's sake, let's just go with, you know, Corebridge, financial, okay, new business forms, Alabama, it's fine. Who wants to live in Alabama, right, Tia? Ugh.
Right. I agree.
So let's just pick a permanent product, so Value Plus Protector. Now you'll see here, all you have to do is hit Get Forms Package. And so it's right here, Part B. So when you pull it up, this is all the questions. Now, the interesting thing is, so they ask about how long, if your parents are still alive, ever been diagnosed or treated for high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, coronary artery, blood clot, blah, blah, blah. Drinking. Okay. So this is always a fun one because, some people will be like, oh yeah, I drink. That's fine. Check. Well, how often do you drink per week? Some people might say, well, I need like 3 a day or something like that. Then all of a sudden you're screwed. You'd be considered an alcoholic. So you have to be specific with the examiner too, because sometimes they don't hear you appropriately. So you might say 5 drinks. That might be for the whole week, but sometimes they'll say, all right, 5 drinks a day. And then all of a sudden you've got like 20 to, 7 times 35, on here. So that's why I say kind of make sure you watch them too as they do this. And like like I said, they say, have you ever used cocaine or heroin, methamphetamines? So, like, I'm not lying when I say, have you ever used cocaine or heroin? It's in here. Um, Marijuana. This is always a fun question too, because you have to understand your client, and your client has to understand the questions. So, when you talk about this, you want to also consult the underwriting manual of who does well with marijuana. Keep in mind, no one tests for THC, which is that, but it's all based on what you disclose. And depending on the size of the case, if you have a bigger case, they're going to see it potentially in doctor's records too. So just kind of understand where you're getting from through that. But any stuff like this, Nana, is basically stuff that is what the examiner asks. And then, been to the emergency room. They'd want to know the doctor's information for that. And then you'll see here, this is the examiner. So part B ends right here, typically. And then the examiner fills out all this information like BP readings. Is the appearance unhealthy or older than stated age? Any physical abnormalities, all this stuff the client doesn't see.
Wow.
So,
So
yeah,
that's what the nurse would be going through, basically.
yes, there are private questions that they would go through
That
and
they and
answer.
wow. Okay.
Yep. So you can see this from anybody's, like Corbridge is the same as everybody else's. Like when I joke about the heroin thing, I was joking about that when I was at MetLife. It's all the same. It's all the same questions. But if you really want to see the basis of what they're going to ask or go through, it's all here, clear as day. Most people either call it Part B or Part Two.
It'd be
So
nice
there's
to just download this and keep this handy. So whenever
you
you have a
can.
client, it's easier to prep the client up first.
Oh, you can. Yeah, I mean, just click on that and,
Gotcha.
that's a PDF. So just, save it. So,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah, you can definitely do that. That's not a problem at all.
Perfect.
So, but that it goes by carrier. So like if you think about it, underwriting under the underwriting resources, underwriting and impaired risk, you can actually go in and see the carrier specific underwriting guides. So, for example's sake, if I wanted to look at Corebridge, here's their field underwriting guide. I went through that kind of quick, but you can see what kind of pitfalls or potential things your clients may have. So, what is needed for certain ages? So, you'll see 0 to 19, they've got nothing because they don't have term insurance until 20. So 20 to 39, PM, paramed, right? Think. Where's PM? Yeah,
Yeah, there's the
paramedical
pyramid.
exam. Yep. Blood and urine. So they are two separate categories. What a lot of people think is a paramed is blood and urine. Paramed is that part B that we just looked at. Blood and urine is separate. Motor vehicle report and credit report. Why would we do a credit report? Does anyone know?
To know if they'll pay their premium.
Yep. Yep. You're behind on your mortgage, if you're behind on your whatevers, if you got a bunch of debt, the carrier loses money on every single sale right off the bat. So why would they take that person's policy, even though they may need it, if they know that habitually they're probably going to lapse the policy? It's not beneficial.
Would that not be a form of discrimination, Philip?
Not really. I mean,
No.
it's called risk. It's bad risk. So
Mm,
if they can't afford premiums or if they can't pay their other bills, they're probably not going to pay their bills for their policies.
wow.
So if the carrier is going to lose money and God forbid that their policies in grace because they didn't pay their premium and they die, then the insurance company got screwed two ways, paying out all the commissions and paying out the claim for someone who barely paid premium. So the commitment is very hard to justify if someone has bad credit, giving them some type of opportunity like this. So
So that
it
would be, especially when you're dealing with a cold case, and that would be an important question to ask the client. What's your credit score? Up ahead.
I mean, I think you can kind of figure that out as you're, talking to your client because if you're doing a financial needs analysis,
Mm,
you'll probably figure out, like, okay, you're underwater. We can't find the money. It's not worth it for me to try and sell you a policy, maybe help you figure out how to help you with your bills a little bit. But, on the same token, our job is to find the money. And if it ain't there, it ain't there. You can't bleed rocks. So, but yeah, that's a big one. And then as you see, motor vehicle report is on all of them. As you get into higher numbers, so you'll see like up to 3 million, you'll only have motor vehicle report and credit report. The minute you go above it, 3 million and a dollar, now you have a financial questionnaire. And those are a pain. I took it down. Oh wait, no. Let's see if it's here. Financial questionnaire. So now you have these type of questionnaires where depending on the size of the face, now you have to give salary or wages, bonuses or commissions, and things like that. So, one of my buddies, when he first came over, he had a case that got declined. It was a family of four, two parents in their 60s, their son who's in his 40s, and his wife. They all got declined due to lack of financials. Now, we looked up in the underwriting guide when you need tax returns. So if I go back here and I see, where it asks for third-party financials, we made sure not to go to a point where we had to get audited financials or, tax returns. And so we applied under that. We filled out that financial questionnaire I just showed you and got him coverage, and the agent made about $350,000. So you have opportunities, but don't be blinded by, the idea of this high policy without checking what the carrier will offer, with minimum scrutiny. So that's why I like us being in this position where we have several carriers where if you have a higher face amount, we can shop several carriers and figure out who's going to give the best rate and the least invasive is always a good way to put it. So does that kind of answer that, in regards to, I guess you'd say this is really a lot of field underwriting, some questions around, how to find the right ways to position it. And ultimately, if you have questions on design, if you have questions on, what the carrier is going to do, highly encourage you under the three mark, once you log in, underwriting resources, underwriting impaired risk, carrier specific underwriting guidelines and resources. And that's where you go through and you got all your carriers. So this will give you that quick link, that quick opportunity. All right, see you, Nana. That'll give you some quick opportunities to take a look at and see if your key carrier that you want to go with will ultimately be the right one to go with. So can't believe it's 8:45 already. Those are good questions. Anyone have any other questions or I know we want to talk about looking at some other things. Jay?
Yeah, Phil, just one question. Like, let's say if somebody gets a tobacco rating or something, can we request for a blood work 1 or 2 years down the lane, and then ask for a better rating? Like, how often we can ask for that?
Every year, really. So if they got a tobacco rating and say on the paramed, right, they said that they smoked 6 months ago. The last time they smoked was 6 months ago. They got a negative urinalysis, but the last time they smoked was 6 months ago. So let's say, for example's sake, I'll pick on another carrier. Let's look at Lincoln. So if we look at Lincoln's underwriting guidelines, you want to look for smoker. So right here, the underwriting classes, standard non-tobacco, average life expectancy does not meet criteria. This class includes applicants who use cigars, pipes, chewing tobacco. It should be okay. Preferred tobacco, standard tobacco. This class is similar to standard non-tobacco, but the insured has smoked cigarettes within the past 12 months. So if your client smoked in the last 6 months, they have to wait either the longer of the anniversary or the last time they smoked. Okay, so in this case, if it was 6 months ago, you have to wait a year from now for the first anniversary to request a non-tobacco rate, which they pee in a cup, negative urinalysis, you're non-tobacco at that point. So
Okay.
you can do that at every anniversary.
Okay.
Okay. So if you
So
want prefer if you
go ahead.
want preferred, you got to wait 24 months from last cigarette use.
So how does that apply to the cigar smoker that's kind of like the social cigar smoker, kind of like he smokes when he drinks? type
That's
situation?
that's a great question too, because there are a few carriers. Lincoln is one of them. So if you go back here and you go to Intel, and you'll see these impairment niches.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see other tobacco, okay? Pru, Lincoln, Hancock, Securian. Those carriers will give you a non-tobacco rate as long as you disclose the cigars, dip, chew, snuff, pipes, not cigarettes, not hookah. Hookah is also bad. Um, but you would have to disclose on the app because they're going to do blood work. There's going to be nicotine in the urine. Next thing you know, because you didn't disclose it, you're going to get a tobacco rating. But if you disclose it, non-tobacco. Um, there are some carriers though, so let's be honest. And Nana jumped, but he and I worked on a case where son doesn't smoke, but found out he went to a party, a few days before his exam and he did some cigars and it came up nicotine. So we then said that was with AIG. And then we said, all right, well, screw it. We know Lincoln, by the way, pays better than Prue and Hancock, but they also have a good product. But Lincoln, we went to Lincoln and they said smoker. Said, what the hell? Well, Lincoln and I believe Prudential put a stake in the ground that said, if you guys have a quote unquote smokeless tobacco, cigar, dip, whatever, and we're your second option, you're going to get a smoker rating just like your first option. So if you have someone who does the dip, chew, snuff, um, Chantix, Lincoln won't take. That would be Hancock or Prue. You would want to look at those carriers for submission before anybody else. Even if they're not your favorites, they're the ones who will give the client the best offer, comparatively speaking, if you know there's going to be blood in the urine, nicotine in the urine.
Got it.
So, yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is a definitely a great question. And I know the carriers have kind of um, buckled down on that because they don't want people lying, basically. So that's the reason why they do that. But that's a great question. Anything else? All right. So let's do a quick switcheroonie. So we talked about field underwriting. We talked about setting expectations. Let's talk real quick about IULs and how to talk about the differences between pars, caps, and spreads. Some of you may be familiar with some of the terminology. Some of you may not be familiar with the other parts of the terminology. So I'm going to go to my handy dandy whiteboard. And I apologize in advance because I'm drawing like this. So if it looks bad, it is what it is. All right. So here's the show and tell. Needs some client participation. So everyone is familiar at how IULs work, right? You have a start point, right? Then you have a time frame, and then you have an end point, right? So that's where you hear the words point to point. We're all good with that? Makes sense? Okay. I'm gonna say silence means yes. So let's say, for example's sake, we are looking at today as let me put this back, 2/19/25. That's your start point. Let's say the S&P is at 1,000 points. Okay, we're using easy math, easy, terminology. We're not using funky indexes or things like that. This is the S&P And at the end of 219, it is at 1,000 points. Now on 219 26, I'm going to apologize. So if some of that just glitched, I got people watching a movie over there. I got a son up there playing video games. So I apologize if it got funky for a second. So 219.25, the S&P finishes at 1,000. 219.26, the S&P finishes at 1,200. So simple math, right? That's what, a 20% gain. Am I right on that math? Yeah, 20% gain. So there are three different ways that the insurance companies will calculate this type of return. There is a cap, there is a par, and there is a spread. So if we have a cap, let's say the cap is 11.5%. In this scenario, this 20% would equal 11.5%. You can't go any higher than the cap. So between 0 to 11.5, whatever it does, and you get credit for that. Does that make sense so far?
Yes.
All right. Next would be par. So let's say, for example's sake, you had a par of 60%. Okay. So in this scenario, 60% times by, let's say, the 20% return, that equals, I'm bad at math, I think that's 12%, but I'm going to just double check. Yep. So that is a 12% return. So we'll fast forward here to spread. Does anyone have an idea of what spread is? So typically what spread is it's done in one of two ways. Okay. So they might do, say, if you have a spread, they might do the first 4%, then they might block you for the next 4%, and then it's uncapped after that. So in this scenario of 20%, you have your first 4%. The second 4% is given back to the company for the spread. And then you have what's remaining left, which is 12%. So 12 plus 4 is 16%. So if you think about that, which one wins in this scenario? It's pretty evident. Spread wins. Okay. So let's go back and we're going to change this to not 20%, but now let's change it to 8%. Okay. So,
Hey, Phil, I have a question before we get too far into the next example, if you don't care.
yeah, what's up?
So, in that spread, when we see these illustrations with these different carriers that we're doing, how do we know what the first component is? So we know what the second component is that the company gets and when it becomes uncapped.
Typically, it's in the illustration, or it's going to be in the producer guide. So
Okay.
but because these can fluctuate, it's usually in the illustration how they're going to do it. Right now, for example's sake, F&G on their annuities has a 0% spread. So some carriers can change that though. So it'll typically be in either the design as you're doing it or in the illustration, not so much the product guide. But it could be in some carriers' case.
So in that scenario, if it was a 0% spread, so the client on the return on a spread, they're going to get zero. And then the company gets zero, and then essentially it becomes uncapped. Is that
Well,
right?
if this spread was zero, you'd have 4%, and then you go right to uncapped, so it's basically uncapped.
Okay.
So, but it's very uncommon to see an S&P with a uncapped. Usually you have a participation rate on an S&P or a cap. The spread is very like you'll never see 100% par rate on an S&P. It's too risky and too volatile. So you'll typically see a par rate for an S&P around 50 to 60%, or you'll see a par, a spread like we have here. So they'll give a little something to the person, but for the most part, it's going to be you'll either have the spread here in the second box or the spread in the first box. And if it's the first box, then typically after that it's uncapped. So
Okay.
that's the difference.
Thank you.
No problem. Now, so like I said, we'll just say for example's sake here, we're changing this to 8% versus, and I'll actually just use a different color. So 8% versus 20%. In this scenario, you now have on the cap, because the max is 11 and a half, but we did 8%, so your return is 8%. The par rate, 60% times by 8% is, I don't know,
4.8.
4.8. That was way off. So 4.8, okay. And then the first four in this spread goes to the client. Second four goes to the insurance company, and then it's uncapped, but it's only 8, so you have 4% here. Who's your winner? So there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to indexing. What you find is to diversify is going to give you the best approach. You'll have some carriers or some spots win in the up times, some win in the down times. And, like this participation rate could win in the really, really up time, depending on how it works. Like, there's just no telling because the market is so finicky. But the big thing and the most important thing is when you're trying to figure out the type of strategy that you want to do for your client, is you want to diversify it. Very often, I will not show the exact same thing that the carrier is recommending because a lot of times the carrier is fighting to get to the top of a spreadsheet. Um, and so I want to look at what I think would be best for the client, most realistic for the client. So oftentimes I look for S&P accounts more than anything, and maybe put a hair into the um, alternative indexes or proprietary indexes. So for those who do AIG, like me for my sons, I did 60% S&P, 20 MLSB, and 20 PIMCO. And there were some months where the S&P did 11 and a half, so it was at that top of the cap, but the MLSB and PIMCO were at 14% returns. Now, if I was a bitter man, say, oh, why didn't I put it in 14%? Opportunity lost. Literally 2 months later, the MLSB was at 8% and the PIMCO was at 6.5. So you're going to have fluctuation, but what you're doing here is what we do for the IULs in general, and that's the phrase of hedging, right? If you have a 6.5% rate of return on your illustration and the client was happy with what that was, then you just want to make sure that you're hitting this 6.5% average. So right now, my boys are at like anywhere from an 8 to 10% rate of return on their policies. Awesome. If I illustrate at 6.5, that means I'm ahead for when I have those down years at fours or zeros or whatever. But I've created a buffer, or I call it a capital cushion. But if you set the expectation, like we talked about in the beginning with underwriting, you set the expectation for this is not going to take a very short time to underwrite. You should also say our expectation is this is the value proposition at 6.5%. We're giving you X number of income or X number death benefit. I think this is an achievable number to hit. So that if a zero hits, but then the next time a 10 hits, you're starting to say, all right, remember, these are averages. It's going to fluctuate over time. Even the in-force illustrations that you run will be reduced because typically the in-forces show a reduced illustration rate. So someone who sold a policy in 2018 will not see the same type of illustration in 2024 because they had to reduce the illustration rates in the system. So even if your product is hitting at 7%, and you illustrated 7%, but the illustration software is now showing 5 or 5.5%, it's just not going to be the same. So you just have to kind of stick to the number that you were thinking in your head. I've always said run around 6 to 6.5% because I've never seen illustration rates really go lower than that. Some indexes will go lower than that, but that's because they have performance bonuses in them or things to beef up what they're supposed to do. So if you run around 6.5%, your client should be happy. But you just have to make sure that you monitor it because these pars and caps can change every single year, and they will.
Well, I have a quick question on that.
Yeah. What's up?
So, in that case, who does the allocation of the funds? And if the client wants to change the indexes every year, we have to sit down and do it personally, or is there a way to do it?
Yeah, so like what I would say is when you think about that, you have your client and there's two trains of thought with that, okay? First off, if I said to you, all right, Roshni, congratulations for buying this IUL. I'll say something cheesy like, this isn't the end of our relationship. This is actually the beginning because I want to talk to you every single year, make sure everything is doing what it's supposed to, kind of like an oil change on a car. Might be a 5-minute conversation. Say, hey, Roshni, you had a 10% rate of return. I think everything looks good. Everything good on your end? Good. Awesome. Any changes that I should be aware of? Everything going okay. What you've done is you've added a touch point so you have future conversation with that client, but you're also maintaining their policy. So from that standpoint, let's say you have a bad year, okay? 0% returns, things like a dog with fleas, right? You have to sit there and say, hey, Roshni, just to give you an idea, you didn't really make a return this year on your product. Now, it doesn't mean that it's bad. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of concerns with the market. So with the election, I know we had, a year ago, it was all the talk about Ukraine. All of that stuff can impact market fluctuation, which can impact your performance. So in perspective, this is what happened. However, I would say we could, and then you could make a recommendation to change allocations or say we should keep the allocations where they're at and see if another year we get better returns and go from there. If they have monthly, it's easier to make quicker decisions because all of those decisions will stop at that point, and anything future will be the new allocations. So there is a perk to having monthly versus annual. If you do annual, you can do a dollar cost averaging, and that will also change all future index allocations. The only time where you'll see that to be a major issue is if you sell Allianz and you sell Allianz on an annual basis, actually even monthly, because Allianz only has one monthly sweep date. So if I bought a policy today and I set it up for monthly, the other 11 buckets are in a fixed account until next year today. And then they all get applied into the system. So it's always beneficial to make sure that, knowing your carrier, understanding what they do, and having some sort of inkling of idea of what the indexes do as well is very important. Now, someone will say to me, they're like, "Hey, Phil, how do you know how the indexes are doing?" It's pretty easy. So I'll say for example's sake, we're talking about the MLSB from AIG. You can pull it up. So you just go to Google and look for it. This one, I can't look at that one, so go to Merrill Lynch. And here's all the information on the fund. Typically, they have a page where you should be able to look it up and see a streamlined approach. Yep. So you can see the overview. You can see, how it's performed last year, total 1 year return. And again, a lot of people don't realize this, that a lot of this doesn't really mean too much. Why? Because when you look at this, this has the ups and the downs. And, let's say I bought a policy today, Jay bought a policy tomorrow, I might get a 10% return. He might get a 3% return because of the fluctuation in the market. So I say use these with a grain of salt. And these all these returns don't include the downside protection. This is the raw market, comparatively speaking. But you can do tests on this. So say January 01, let's just say 2023, and then go January. Oh, it didn't ever. You know what I mean? So you can modify it from here if you want to see calculated 1 year returns and things like that. So if you have a specific carrier or a specific index that you want to look at, you could kind of go forth and do that. So here's the start point for January, and then right around here, right there is the end point. So 1651, and you started at 1582, so you would have a positive if you bought on January 1st. So you can always look at stuff like this and see kind of the trends. All you have to do is really Google the index, and that's really how they find that information. But does that make sense?
Yes, Phil. Thanks. Yeah.
No problem. Anybody have any other questions? Was this part helpful with the pars and the caps and everything? Does this give a little better clarity on different ways that you can kind of hedge, if you will, or look at different options for indexing?
So when you say that they could change allocation, is the allocation the par cap or spread, or is the allocation the index? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if you wanted to, like, for example's sake, all right, let's say I go to WinFlex. And as I mentioned, a lot of times the carriers have a bias already set up in the system. So let's say, for example's sake, here you look at the QOL product, max accumulator, and if you see under the indexes, it's all set 100% at the MLSB. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we looked at the MLSB, clear as day, somewhere in here. Anyway, and it was about, 100-point return or whatever. So it's at a current participation rate of 100%. So whatever the return was is what you got. Now, if the S&P is at 11.5%, the S&P between January of last year and January of this year probably had a better return. So if I have it 100% here, come my next anniversary date, I want to make sure that I get a submission of the allocation changes into Corebridge to diversify it. So, like I said, 20, 20, 60, or 33, 33, 34, something like that to give you a little bit of a flavor of variation.
Yeah,
A little, that's the best way to go.
got it, got it,
Um,
got it.
yeah, a secret tip between us girls, when you have a par rate that's lower than 100, it usually means it's more aggressive. So it's probably going to outperform something that's at like 200% because they're buffering it to give you a makeup for what you would consider a more conservative account. So, if this said 200%, I would probably stay away from it. That's just me. So you don't have to tell
So,
everybody that
quick
little
question.
secret. Keep it to us. What's up, JP?
Yeah, so Columbus has a monthly S&P no cap,
Yep.
if you remember. So, would you suggest that if you know, okay, probably next 2, 3 years market can go up?
So the interesting thing about Columbus is in their scenario interest rate. So you have the capped point to point. They're at, I think, 11.5 or 12%, somewhere in that frame. They have the spread, uncapped monthly average. So with the uncapped monthly average, some of that times, so it depends on the carrier. I haven't asked them yet, but let's say, for example's sake, you see the word averaging. That to me is kind of a tip off. So let's say 1 month point to point, you have a 20% return. The next month you have a zero. Well, they're not going to give you 20% for that month and zero there. They're going to average them all together and give you whatever that yearly is what you would get. So it's not like you'll get 20, 0, 20, 0. It would be if they all equated to 10, you get 10. So that's why I say, like, kind of watch out for when they say averaging. Like if it's uncapped, not averaged monthly, then I would definitely go in on that. But because it's averaging, they're still hedging it by the total 12 months. They'll take the average of the total 12 months.
Okay. Yeah,
So
and also I heard that another company, probably Securian, is also giving a better return for IULs because of this lowest rates for borrowing money.
everyone's going to have a story. So if you hear different stories from different people, I don't like Securian because they have higher costs of insurance. So for me, the cheaper cost of insurance I found is Symetra, comparatively speaking, versus Securian. So the only time I've looked at Securian is juvenile policies because they give preferred ratings for juvies. But even then, a smoker rating on a juvie with Corebridge is fairly close in pricing to Securian's preferred non-tobacco on juvies. So it's comfort words for certain
Okay.
situations. So, you're always going to get talking points from all the carriers. That's why, like for me, I kind of steer clear of the noise because if I'm going to research every single carrier, then I'm not going to sell anything. you know? So, but yeah, I mean, Securian is a good company. Don't get me wrong. I like them more for the hybrid LTC products than I do for their actual products, if that makes sense.
Okay.
but good
Phil,
question.
Phil, I have another quick question on that.
Yeah, what's up?
So, is there any charge or any cost for changing the allocation or changing the indexes? No, not at all.
Nope. Nope.
Okay.
You're just moving it. Yeah, so no issue from that standpoint. Yeah, that's a good question. Like you think of like you sell a stock and you have to transfer it, so there's a charge and all the other stuff. You don't have that with these. Because again, just remember we're mirroring the index, we're mirroring the index strategies, so it's not technically in the strategy itself, if that makes sense.
Got it. Thank you, Phil.
Good question. Any other questions? I know we've been on for about an hour and a half, almost hour and 20. So just wanted to see anything else that I'm missing that you guys wanted to get some clarity on. Um, I don't want to jump into another separate topic, but I'll give you guys a second to think about it. While I do that, I'm going to do the cheap shameless plug. So tgcconference.com. There's no excuse for you Dallas folk. You got to register and be there. Looking at you, Roshni. Um, but this is a day and a half, and it's just going to be a great event. So we actually have Roshni, you'll like this. We have a women speaker. So her name is Judy Hoberman. She
Okay.
wrote a book called Selling with a Skirt.
Mm-hmm.
She did the TED Talk, and she's going to talk about I think it's mind, money, and something else. The mindset of empowering women in financial services.
Wow.
So I
I won't
know
miss that.
you
I
better
have to
not.
attend that.
You better.
So it's on
So
third? Is this on third,
mhm.
or are there going to
Third.
be separate speakers for both the days, or they are the same speakers?
Oh no, why would we do the same speakers? That'd be crazy talk. So here, I'll give you guys a sneak peek on the Excel sheet of what we got going on. So this is as of right now, because it is tentative to change, but we have registration and networking, the introduction to the collaboration. So why again are we doing this? Then we're going to have Joe Ross come up from AIG Talk. He's going to talk about the fundamental elements of indexing and things like that. So very motivational, inspirational. Then we're going to break it off into three rooms. So last year we had everything in the main room, and then we had two breakouts in two sessions, so four total, and you got to pick one or the other both times. Here, what we're doing is we're using three rooms and giving people choices. So we'll have Corbridge in the main room, Lafayette. So if you want to hear a little bit more about whole life, Mutual of Omaha has some simplified issue products and things like that. Then after that, we'll have Symetra, National Life Group, and North American. And then I just got confirmation, so Ensight will be there. This is some technology that we use to help speed up the illustration process. So if you're running multiple carriers, we'll have a strategy that allows you to buy what I would call a tech package to help you with that if you want to use something like that. Columbus, and then this is tentative. We've got a company where if you work with businesses, they offer a strategy on how to save them money on electric, heat, water, and in return, you would get a referral commission based off of if they move forward with the process. So it's a really cool thing. We are providing lunch. Believe it or not, we're providing lunch. So everyone will be fed. Then my business partner Roderick is going to talk about working the athlete market. So the athlete market is a $2.5 billion industry, and we're just scratching the surface on it with name, image, and likeness and things like that. I'll talk about alternative investments, and my dad is actually showing up for this event. My dad is a registered investment advisor, but he also is a divisional VP for a reverse mortgage company. So he's going to talk about how the affluent can use reverse mortgages to create another line of income for them to use during their retirement. So he'll be talking about reverse mortgages, how to partner with a reverse mortgage specialist. I'm not telling you to go out and become a reverse mortgage specialist. One of my business partners, his name is Michael Garcia. He's going to do an infinite banking, like with true infinite banking, like whole life. So again, Lafayette's coming to talk about whole life. He's going to be doing whole life. Um, I'll be doing a session on how to build an independent agency, how we do it, how it can be done, in general. People who want to add ACA and Medicare to their portfolio. I'll do another session on working with business owners. I'll have my friend Lindsay do something on partnering with RIAs, how to work with RIAs, figure out the best way to partner with them, and everybody wins together. And then we'll have a representative from Net Law coming to talk about Net Law. Jim Morris is the speaker, the final speaker for the day. If you saw the movie with Dennis Quaid called The Rookie, he was the rookie. So he went into the Major League Baseball at age 35. So, a pretty cool story. The next day, we're going to do networking. We're going to talk about marketing. So, my buddy Nathan is going to talk about some tech packages and stuff that we have for that. Um, and then Judy Hoberman is going to jump on stage to talk about women in finance. We'll have me do an estate planning presentation, followed by a gentleman by the name of Brandon Rockstar Rooks. He's part owner of Rockstar Capital, and he's going to talk about how we have alternative investments that can go as low as 10 grand a year, or 10 grand as the funding option with a 10% fixed return every single year. Now, the cool thing is that that'll lead up to Carson Porter, who he has sold a couple different insurance agencies in his day. And he's about our age, like, mid 40s ish. And he's going to talk about how to utilize what Brandon's going to talk about and how to get a $1 million premium ticket. So, for example's sake, client invests money into an IUL because they need the insurance. And then they take a loan out almost immediately and puts it into the Rockstar Capital alternative investment. Let that grow, put money back into the policy from the interest that you earn along with whatever, and helps the policy grow too. So there's ways that you can reduce overall cost for a high income earner and ultimately get higher ticket sales, not using premium finance because premium finance is cumbersome and really annoying. I'll just put it that way. Wrap up key takeaways and then we're off. So this is the tentative event schedule. So we're going to have a lot of booths also outside. So we'll have a gentleman talking about disability insurance, different DI ways to sell DI. We'll have people out there talking about women in finance as a separate booth for like if you want to join a group of other women across the country for a program called My Financial Girlfriend. And then we'll have all the carriers will have their booths too, and things like that. So, um, I mean, I'll ask you guys because you're the first ones. What do you think of the agenda? Is it, pretty decent setup, in regards to what we got going on?
Sounds good. It sounds exciting.
Yep,
Better be there.
excited, Phil.
Good,
So,
good.
Phil, what's the maximum capacity and so far, how many?
380 is the total. I'm gonna probably accept up to 400. And we're up to about 50 right now. We haven't really started the Facebook ads yet. So what I would say is seating is limited. That's why we're charging this year. It's a whopping $25. And we also have a discount for the West End for those outside of Texas, outside of Dallas. It's about 170 a night, which is normally 230 a night. So we got a discount off of discount off of the rooms. And like I said, $25 for this much content. You can't find that anywhere else. So I'd highly encourage people to register now before all the tickets are gone, and just really kind of put my mind at ease because I get heart palpitations if I don't see these numbers go up quicker. That's just me being me though. So, but that's what we got going. So, any last comments, questions? Raw burst of emotion?
All excited, Phil, to attend the collaboration. And yes, I'll go ahead and register tomorrow. So you have sent the link, right?
If you actually go on tgcconference.com, which is in the chat,
Okay.
just click on that and you can just hit, just scroll down. You'll see register now, and then it'll bring you to, where you put your information in, card, submit, and you're good to go.
All right. We'll be done.
Awesome. Well, guys, it was a pleasure this evening. I know we went over a lot, so underwriting stuff, product stuff, this stuff. But I can't thank you guys enough for jumping on late. And we'll see you tomorrow, or we'll see you next Wednesday, or both. So have a great night, guys.
Thank you so much,
So
Phil.
everyone,
Thank you,
night.
Phil.
See you guys.